in case you had trouble hearing, the question was, how can we get people who are not gamers to appreciate all of the artistry and all of the excitement that goes into games? And so first of all, I want to comment that video gaming is not that old as a medium. It's only been around for about 45 or 50 years in the mainstream, 60 or 70 if you go all the way back to the very first video games. It's not that old of a medium, and a lot of that time as a medium was spent outside of people's homes. It was spent in arcades. It was spent, in places like Chuck E. Cheese or places like that. It wasn't really until the last 20 or 30 years that people really began earnestly buying video games and playing them in their home. So just as time marches on and more people have grown up with them, I think that attitudes towards them as a medium is going to change. I think also we're seeing a big shift right now from gaming being just something where you go to the store and buy some games and play them and beat them, to gaming being a more persistent lifestyle. If you look at games that are very popular right now, like PUBG or Fortnite, these are games that are going to be around for years that people get really obsessive about. Just recently, there were some stories about high school Wi-Fi networks getting crashed because so many kids were playing Fortnite Battle Royale, which is amazing. That kids are playing these games on their smartphone, they're talking about them as part of their social fabric. So I think a lot of the changes are going to come just naturally with time. Now, I would also recommend, if any of you are interested in learning more about games as an art form, there's a great movie that's called Indie Game the Movie that's all about 3 different indie games that got made. Indie games are kind of on the periphery of gaming, and they often are very innovative and very interesting. That movie is fantastic and well worth watching. There's also a book that came out not that long ago that you can find on Amazon. It's called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. And this book is all about the creation of big budget video games, and it's really, really fascinating. Just seeing how much time and energy that developers put into games, and a lot of things that they try to put in games don't actually make the final cut. So they have a lot of things that they talk about in that book that'll kind of tell you the decisions that are made to turn a game that's from a creative project into something that can be sold in the market. So I hope that answers your question well, but thank you. That was an excellent question. Yes?
Fantastic. Thank you. This is great. So you've touched on a lot of different kinds of games. So like games on your phone and console games. And I'm just kind of wondering, how do you define a gamer? Because I have a feeling that there are a lot of people out there that like don't even realize that they're being classified as a gamer. So
That's a wonderful question.
What does a gamer mean to you?
So in the research, there's even a difficulty because it's often a self-reported title. So I consider myself a gamer because I enjoy video games. I own every PlayStation that's come out. I've owned most of the Nintendo consoles and things like that. So I consider myself a gamer for that reason. But there are a lot of people that play games during the day. My wife would be a great example. My wife plays Match 3 games on her phone every day while she listens to audiobooks, and she would not call herself a gamer, and yet she might even spend more time gaming in a day than I do because she links it with another activity. So right now it's kind of a self-reported title. I would say it's very similar to someone, for example, who says that they're a film snob, or someone that says that they like to read. It's not necessarily tied to the activity or the amount of time they spend on it as much as the identity. And the identity is something that can be troubling because coming out and saying, oh, I'm a gamer, in certain social circles can be really detrimental to your standing with other people, especially when you're around adults who think that they've outgrown games. They really don't like to hear from people that are still playing God of War and things like that, but you just kind of have to learn to navigate those situations. With that said, I think the reality is that there is a division between people that are what we call hardcore gamers, who are really active and participate in playing a lot of the games that are out there, and people that are more casual gamers that just play games on their smartphones or in their web browsers. And those are pretty well understood divisions among the people that make and sell games.
Thank you. I actually have 2 questions. The first is, and I think this might still be a pretty big argument today. I just remember there being a lot of talk about it in the past, how there's a pretty solid argument for violent video games causing and influencing violent behavior in the real world, such as Grand Theft Auto. That's one of the big ones I've heard about, being a problem, which, for the record, I don't really agree with that argument. I think in special cases, there's been really weird situations where that kind of happened. But like, what are your opinions on that? Like, what do you feel about that?
So the science is where I always have to turn on this because I anecdotally, I feel like violent video games are not correlated to violent behavior because I've played violent video games and I am one of the least violent people I've ever known. I don't like to kill anything. So to me, it seems like kind of a strange thing, and that maybe it's more correlated to the type of personality you have or the outlets for anger you have. What the science suggests is that video games can cause an increase in aggression temporarily, but it's usually not long term. And that people that do have problems with dissociating fantasy from reality, that tends to be a mental health problem that's deeper than just their love of video games. It tends to be something that they need to undergo treatment for other areas in their life as well. And I'm not a clinician. I can't make any kind of diagnoses or talk about those with any kind of expertise. But I suspect that violence that emanates from video games is probably symptomatic of deeper issues. Video games are just kind of the easy scapegoat to blame.
And then the second is, I was just thinking games as far as like Halo and Call of Duty, how they are supposed to be a friendly social kind of gaming activity. But do you think maybe like, for instance, EA, the company EA kind of like made it to where that's kind of what they were aiming for as far as like really negative like outcomes happening from that, like as far as gamers just cussing at each other and it being more about the competitive part than actually cooperating as a team in that game and having fun, but instead it's turned into like every man for himself, and it becomes so bad to the point where friendships are even like torn up. And
so toxicity in multiplayer gaming is a big problem, and it's a problem that many multiplayer games face, even really benign games face. And EA, who actually did not make Call of Duty or Halo, but EA they make the Battlefield and Medal of Honor and Star Wars Battlefront games. EA has had to deal with that problem as much as anyone. I don't think I've known many game developers. I don't think any actually set out to make games that are going to encourage toxic communities, with the rare exception of that weird, auteur or somebody that really wants to provoke people. But I think for the most part, these games are intended to be mass market. They're intended to be fun, and the problems that emanate from online communities are really a function of something else. I didn't get to talk about this, but there's a real problem in how video games that are sold to the mass market are made and marketed towards teenage boys. And even though, as we talked about, teenage boys are not the people that are predominantly playing games, there still is a mindset in the industry that they are the most desirable group. They're the most passionate fans. They're the ones that are most likely to rush out and buy games when they first come out. Again, it's not true, but that's kind of the mindset. And so a lot of these games are designed with those audiences in mind to appeal to those audiences, and unfortunately they tend to attract those kind of behaviors just by the nature of being that design of game. I think if you play games where those kind of behaviors are not tolerated as much, you'll find that you don't have as many teenage boys playing them. It's just kind of an interesting facet of gaming. Thank you. Very great questions.
Anybody has any more questions? Yeah.
Please do.
Sure. We'll take the last question for the next session, but everyone please be welcome to hang out in the lounge when we are done.
Thank you very much. So just one quick thing to add. I discovered a few years ago that the primary reason why video games are associated to teenage boys is due to the marketing in the 90s, because they needed to decide which video game publishers needed to decide which aisle to place video games in, whether in the toy section for girls or the toy sections for boys. And because their market research showed that girls played about 42 or 49% of gamers, they're like, okay, we'll make a higher margin with boys. So they started to focus on the boys aisle. And this propagated over multiple years, which is why most of the video game ads, probably in the 90s, throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, were primarily with boys, and it's not until recent years that they started to evolve their strategies to also include girls as well. So this is just a little add-on.
That's very true and very interesting fact of gaming, is that originally gaming was marketed after the Great Atari crash in 1983. Gaming was marketed through the toy aisle, starting with the Nintendo Entertainment System. And as you said, they had to decide, are we going to focus on boys or focus on girls? And boys were the focus. And those attitudes are still around, even to this day. Well, I want to thank you all for your attention. I want to thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning. I hope this has been interesting and engaging for you. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I love to talk about this stuff, and I'm always happy to share any insights that I have. Thank you so much.